I'm starting out with this frame, which I picked up from Habitat for Humanity probably about a year ago and had turned it into a display shelf, but I'm no longer using the shelf and wanted to repurpose this. If you want to see how I created the original shelf, I will link that video in the description below. But the frame is 17 inches by 14 inches, and I'm cutting down a piece of foam core board to be my backing. Next, I bought this chunky sweater from the Goodwill and cut out the back of it. This is going to be the background, and I just love the texture and cozy vibe that this adds. To attach the sweater, I'm using my Gorilla hot glue, and to make sure I got the sweater to look straight, I took one of the straight lines on the knit and used that as my guide. So after gluing the bottom, I went to the top. That way I didn't end up stretching out one side more than another, and was careful not to pull the sweater too taut to shift the pattern on the front of it. Once all of the sides were glued down, I cut off the excess and glued the frame on top. Now to add the detail, I had this almost perfectly sized scrap piece of leather and just cut it down slightly so it measures 12 inches by 4 inches. But I didn't really care for the color, so I'm taking several different paint colors and a sponge and just experimenting, playing around until I get the look I'm after. Next, I cut out the word believe with my Cricut, and I used the font Agency FB. I'm going to use this as a stencil. I like using Dollar Tree contact paper to make my stencils to keep the cost low for something I'm just going to throw away. I always forget to make sure there's a border around stencils, so no surprise here, I forgot to do that. Learn from my mistakes. Make sure you add a rectangle, a circle, a square, whatever the shape of your stencil cutout is going to be. I ended up having to add some painter's tape so that I wouldn't get the paint on my leather where I didn't want it. Oh my gosh, you guys. Next, I made such a mess. I forgot I had already opened the lid of my black paint, picked it up to shake it, and yeah, I'm sure you can guess what happened next. It went all over my project, my hand, my craft mat. What a mess. But I recovered, cleaned it up, added the black paint to my stencil using a sponge dabber. And then after I added the stencil, I went back and fixed the part of my leather where the black paint had spilled on it, and it looks good as new. Nothing ever happened here. Now we just need to attach the leather to the sweater. I used my hot glue again for this. And added one last detail with these nail head trim pieces I had on hand to each corner, and that was it for this one. If you couldn't tell by my last two Christmas videos that I have posted so far this season, I am going for a very cozy, natural materials, Scandinavian neutral vibe this Christmas, and I'm absolutely loving it. Next up, I found this adorable sled at Goodwill for $2.99, and I'm going to start by cleaning it off, and this is going to be another really easy project. I cut off the twine because it had definitely seen better days and gave the whole thing a scuff sand just to scratch up the surface for the paint to adhere better. I know there are people who believe you do not need to prep a surface for sanding. prior to adding chalk paint. However, I like to take this added step just to ensure my project is going to last longer. After sanding, I use my little tabletop vacuum to clean up the dust. I love this thing. It is linked in my description box. And then taking my favorite paint color at the moment, Fawn by Waverly, painting just the rails of the sled. Is that what they're called? I'm not sure. For the top of the sled, I'm using Ivory by Waverly. I did have to give the top 3 coats of paint to cover up that orange wood tone. I'm not a big fan of distressing, but I do think some pieces look good with it. This was one of those pieces, so I took a 220 grit sandpaper and took off the white paint to show some of the wood underneath, adding to that natural vibe I'm going for, and just on the edges of the sled. I love the Scandi forest inspiration I've been seeing lately and wanted to add some thin little trees to this decor piece. So I started out with a pencil but quickly abandoned that and just went in with a thin black Sharpie to keep it feeling organic. After I was happy with the trees, I added a new twine hanger, knotted it in the front, and then burned off the frayed bits. If you're not comfortable with this step, don't do it. It's not necessary. I just like the way it looks, but that was it for this one. Next, I picked up 3 of these wood cutouts from Dollar Tree and painted them with my favorite fawn color. The lighting on this first part is a little bit off. Bear with me for a minute. It was the first thing I had recorded with my new camera about a month ago, and I finally figured out the settings. But after the fawn color, I'm taking khaki and warm buff by Apple Barrel and a chippy brush to give all 3 trees a heavy dry brushing, semi-blending the colors together to give a more woodsy kind of vibe. And again, I just played around with the colors until I was happy with the look. I love how you can achieve a variety of styles with paint, from faux wood to faux metal to faux leather. The possibilities really are endless and a lot of fun to just play around and see what happens. If you don't like it, it's only paint, cover it up with a solid color and start over. Next, I took one of these MDF signs from Dollar Tree and painted the whole thing black. Then I added some Jenga blocks, painted the same way as the trees, and hot glued them to the back of the block and 2 trees up against those. I had wanted to make the 2 trees in the back slightly taller, but completely forgot, and then it was too late after I had glued them down. So I just added the last tree in front, and that was it for this one. Super easy. That's all I got for you today, friends. I'll see you in the next one.